Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and today we are continuing on with the 50 Shades of Evil series. We're going to go to the state of Minnesota, and I'm going to give you all the deep dive details into the murder of Katherine Ann Olson by Michael John Anderson, also known as the Craigslist Killer. Now, there have been several evil individuals dubbed with this moniker, if you will, but Michael John Anderson was the first and really raised some early red flags on how the internet could quite literally be used to kill, and that highlighted the very real dangers that existed in these early days of internet classified ads. Now, Katherine Ann Olson, she was a vibrant, talented 24-year-old, had her whole life ahead of her. And Michael Anderson, he was a 19-year-old living at home, seemingly trying to figure out his path in the world, and those paths would cross over a fake babysitting ad on Craigslist. Now, in a matter of minutes, one precious life was taken when on October 26 of 2007, authorities in Minneapolis responded to a report of an abandoned vehicle in what's known as the Burnsville Nature Preserve. Inside the trunk of that car was the body of a young woman. She had been shot in the back, and that was Katherine Ann Olson. And she had been simply looking for nanny type work to bide her time after college until her dream job had come along. But what investigators would uncover next would lead them to a quiet suburban home in Savage, Minnesota, a 19-year-old named Michael John Anderson, and a case that quickly would earn that label, Craigslist Killer. So before we get into it, a couple of things to remind you regarding Craigslist. In the late 2000s, Craigslist was the go-to platform for everything from furniture to jobs to, yeah, you named it. You know what I'm talking about. For many, it was convenient and harmless. Think of it as the online version of newspaper classified ads. But like everything else on the internet, what law-abiding good citizens would see as harmless and good change and something that benefits the internet as it relates to technology, bad actors, they would discover ways to exploit it. And in the case we're discussing today, it was really one of the first cases that thrust this issue so far into the national spotlight that it forced these giant .com type businesses to rethink everything from access to security on those platforms. So let's get into it, and I'm going to take you back to September 16th of 1983 in Savage, Minnesota, where Katherine Ann Olson entered the world. Now, she grew up in what's known as Cottage Grove. This is a suburban community. It's along the Mississippi River, just southeast of St. Paul, Minnesota. Her parents were the Reverend Rolf Olson and Nancy Olson, and they provided a stable, faith-centered home that emphasized compassion, education, and being creative. And Katherine was the middle child. She had an older sister named Sarah, a younger brother named Carl, and family was everything to the Olsons. Just your all-American family living their version of the American dream. Good people. Now, from an early age, Katherine developed quite the personality. Friends and family would recall her as someone who would light up every room she went into. She was outgoing. She was kind-hearted, just one of those full-of-life people. And she had a natural curiosity about the world, especially about other cultures. And these passions weren't just hobbies. They will become central to who Katherine was. Now, her father, a preacher, he often spoke about how Katherine would embody the self above others mentality, serving people and connecting with people. And those were values that she carried throughout her short but very impactful life. And education, of course, would play a major role in shaping her even at a very young age. She would attend local schools in Cottage Grove, where her brain power, it would be quickly noticed. Teachers would recall her dedication to school, her quick mind, her ability to balance schoolwork with extra activities. And by the time she reached Park High School, Katherine was a standout student. She didn't only excel in the classroom, though. She also excelled in theater production. She was quite the little actress, and that fed her love of performing. And she would build strong friendships through that would last far beyond her graduation from high school. So in 2002, she would graduate. She was co-valedictorian of Park High School, and it was a proud moment, obviously, for her parents, that not only did she graduate with high marks, I mean, she was co-valedictorian, very smart. Her friends super proud of her, and later they would describe her as a young woman who wasn't just book smart, but also deeply empathetic and really cared for people. So Katherine's childhood wasn't without the normal ups and downs of growing up. Everything sounds perfect. It's not. You know, everybody goes through things, and Katherine, she struggled a little bit with some insecurities that just about every teenager has, most kids have, but that love and stability from her family would help her to navigate those things, and it was never really an issue. Now, her parents were very encouraging, and by the time that she left for college, she was confident. She was accomplished. An 18-year-old ready to embrace the next chapter that life was going to bring her. Her early life in Cottage Grove equipped her with everything that she would need to succeed in the world. So while Katherine Ann Olson was growing up in this supportive, academically focused household in Cottage Grove, about 30 miles away in Savage, Minnesota, another young life was taking shape under very different circumstances. Michael John Anderson, he was born October 16th of 1988. He was the youngest of three children to Stephen and Barbara Anderson. And Savage, that community is a typical suburban community. It's in the Twin Cities metro area. You got families, you got quiet streets, and of course a mix between working class and middle class homes. And the Andersons, they lived in a pretty nice 2-story house where Michael spent most of his childhood. Now, Michael's dad, Stephen, he worked as a mechanic for Northwest Airlines before he got laid off, and he would transition into trucking, while Michael's mother, Barbara, managed the household. And Michael's older siblings, they would round out that family by outward appearances. It was just an ordinary upbringing. The family had access to all the amenities, if you will, of the area, parks, schools, just small town America, right? But those who spoke later about Michael, they would describe a boy who struggled socially to make friends in those early years. As a child, he would develop an interest in activities that were structured, very structured stuff, or just solo stuff, gaming, etc. And one passion he had was paintball. He enjoyed the equipment, the strategic side of paintball, and the outdoor aspect of that sport. Now, neighbors would later recall him as quiet, somewhat reserved, and he attended the local schools in the Savage area during his elementary and middle school years, and reports indicate he was a student who was average. He wasn't horrible, wasn't a standout like Katherine was, just average student, which nothing wrong with that. Now, Michael, as I said, was the baby of the family. And like many of the youngest children, you would think he would benefit from the experience his parents had raising his older siblings. You know, parents learn from their mistakes. And as these kids come along, they learn more and more. You would think that would help. One thing he did share with his dad in particular was his love for mechanical things and auto work especially, and working with engines, things like that. And we'll get into more of that later. But his childhood in the late 1990s and early 2000s seems and appears normal. The only thing that is maybe off-putting or would signal anything going on in his life was he would isolate himself often. There were no major family disruptions, though, or any sort of public trouble where he got arrested, something like that, that would point to this kid ever committing a heinous act like you're about to learn about. So in 2002, Katherine, she heads off to college at St. Olaf College. This is in Northville, Minnesota. It's a liberal arts school. It's known for strong academic programs and a very vibrant campus life. And at that school, Katherine pursued dual degrees in theater and Hispanic studies, which, look, these fields were perfect for her. She could focus on her creative spirit with theater and her love of culture with that Hispanic studies degree. And theater would allow her to perform, direct, immerse herself in storytelling. And of course, the Hispanic studies side would feed her curiosity about the world outside of Minnesota. Friends and professors would later describe her as dedicated, enthusiastic, and very talented. In college life, that would suit Katherine well. She formed more close friendships. That outgoing personality that benefited her in high school, just natural transition. She was a connector, the kind of person that you really wanted to be friends with. And it was during this time at college she began exploring nanny positions as a way to make extra money and support herself. And one notable opportunity would take her all the way to Turkey, where she worked as a nanny through a Craigslist ad, and she just had a great, wonderful experience doing this. So by her early 20s, Katherine was confident, well-rounded, and she had big dreams. Now, she had planned to study theater in Madrid, Spain, and that was as part of a graduate program with St. Olaf College. And in 2007, at this point, she's 24 years old. She had just graduated a couple of years earlier. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she's still trying to kind of figure it out. What's my next move going to be? So as Katherine was doing that, Michael John Anderson's teenage years, they would unfold in a much more isolated manner in Savage, Minnesota. By his mid-teens, Michael had transitioned from a regular school to an alternative high school after struggling in the more traditional school setting, and he would eventually drop out of high school. And at this stage, Michael's living at his family's two-story home with his parents. Michael would start taking on jobs in auto parts warehouses, and that work would align with his mechanical interest, and it would provide some structure and income for him. And he also would work for an airport as sort of a mechanic, but he wasn't like building airplanes. He was filling gas tanks, things like that. And he would spend a significant amount of his time away from work buying and selling truck parts online. And he became especially familiar with a platform like Craigslist to list and sell these parts. Think of it like the mid-2000s version of what Facebook Marketplace is today. So socially, Michael didn't get any better. He remained withdrawn, and reports from that time would describe him as someone who had never dated, never attended a high school dance. He lacked close friendships, and those warning signs were really starting to develop with this kid. So on October 22nd of 2007, Katherine Ann Olson, she was taking temporary nanny positions while planning her next move, and that day she was scanning Craigslist, as she had done successfully so many times before. And she responds to an ad that she saw, and it looked promising. And the posting was from a woman named Amy. And Amy was looking for a babysitter for her 5-year-old daughter in Savage, Minnesota. So Katherine exchanges emails with Amy. She arranges a time to meet with Amy. And on October 25th of 2007, 3 days later, she drives from Minneapolis to that address provided in the emails. So that morning, just prior to 9 o'clock a.m., Katherine called Amy and left a voicemail with her ETA, and she heads Amy's way, and she arrives at 12649 Kipling Avenue South and upon arriving, Katherine meets Amy. Only it wasn't Amy. It was 19-year-old Michael John Anderson. So a neighbor, she would later report seeing a car parked in front of the house for more than 2 hours. Now inside, according to the prosecution's reconstruction of the events many years later, Katherine met Michael and something went wrong. She tried to leave. Maybe she had the spidey senses. Something's not right. There's no Amy here and I'm getting the hell out of here. But Anderson goes and retrieves his father's .357 Magnum revolver and he shoots her in the back. And the physical evidence left little room for argument. Katherine's blood was found in multiple locations inside that home, including a trail and drag marks on the stairway leading from the bedroom area. And in Anderson's bedroom, investigators would recover a handgun later, as well as spent shell casing and bloody towels, one of which bore Anderson's name. I'm assuming these towels were like embroidered with this 19-year-old kid's name, which if that don't scream weird, I don't know what does. What 19-year-old gets towels embroidered? But besides the point, at that point, he drags her downstairs and he ties her ankles with red twine and he cleans up those trails of blood that had descended down those stairs. But he's sloppy. He doesn't notice and he misses blood on the risers of those stairs. He then wraps her up in a sleeping bag, tosses her in the trunk of his own car, and drives her to Burnsville Nature Preserve, which is nearby, where he abandons the car with her body in the trunk and tosses her purse into a trash can. And then he simply walks back home. And later that day, he reports to work at his airport job where he fuels planes as if nothing ever happened. Now, when he gets home later that night, he even gives his blood-stained work jacket to his mother. And when she inquired about what was all over his jacket, he tries to tell her it was jet fuel from work. And it's interesting that prosecutors would mention later that Anderson had been posting multiple ads in the weeks leading up to this day, some seeking, quote, sexy voiced women, models, actresses. So he was getting really freaky already on this site. And you can see this kid is off the deep end. So obviously at this point in the story, nobody outside of Michael Anderson knows any of this is taking place. The next day, a good Samaritan at the preserve calls police and tells them, hey, I found a purse in a garbage can. And Officer Swell, he goes and meets this person at that preserve and he retrieves said purse. And as luck would have it, and to the credit of the sheer stupidity of this 19-year-old idiot, Michael had not even pulled out her driver's license. Katherine's driver's license was still in the purse. So police knew exactly who this purse belonged to. Now, they didn't know she was in any duress or anything, but you find a purse like that, you get very curious. The officer goes back to the station, he runs the license, and then he heads to the address on that license to deliver the purse. And when he gets to that address, he speaks to Katherine's parents. Now, Katherine's parents explained to the officer that they had not talked to her in a day or so. She didn't actually live with her parents. She lived in an apartment nearby. It was very out of character for her not to speak to her parents throughout the day, every day. So they tried to call her. They couldn't get in touch with her. And her mother, Nancy, went on to say they called the roommate trying to locate her daughter. And the roommate said that he had not talked to Katherine. Her roommate was a male. His name was Matt. And when police spoke to him, he confirmed everything Katherine's mother, Nancy, had told them. However, he did mention to police that the last time he had spoken to Katherine, she said she had a job doing some nanny work for a woman named Amy through Craigslist. And he also mentioned that Katherine had shown him some of the emails back and forth between Katherine and Amy, and in his mind, they were a little off. He said the emails were just a little strange. And it's at this point that police say, hey, you happen to know her password, or can you access her email? And we check out what these emails said. And I don't know if she was already logged in or if he knew her email password, but he was able to access her email for the police. And in those emails, the police were able to determine the address and phone number of Amy, which we know is really Michael. So by 5:15 p.m. that very same day, police already had an address and phone number of the last place this young lady was known to be. And a female detective by the name of Detective Kwasnicka, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, heads to that address to see what was up. However, when she gets there, she knocks on the door and nobody answers. She waits around for a little while, kind of looks through the windows, doesn't see anybody. So she leaves her business card in the door and she turns to walk back to her police unit. Now, at this point, she actually sees a neighbor, and the detective speaks to this neighbor, and she asks that neighbor, hey, do you know anything about the people that live here? Is there an Amy that lives here, etc.? And the neighbor's like, no, Amy lives there. And she goes through, it's a mom, a dad, and a son. His name is Michael Anderson. And at that point, the detective knows something's not right if an Amy doesn't live there and no child lives there, especially. Remember, there's supposed to be a 5-year-old there. Those spidey senses go up, and she heads back to the station. And it's there that this female detective gets the deets on Catherine's car and tag number, because at this point, Katherine is a missing person. Nobody knows anything nefarious has actually happened, though they do suspect it. So around 6 p.m., that officer that actually found the purse, Officer Swell, he returns to that area where the purse was found. He's thinking, I wonder if there's other clues, maybe around that garbage can where I found the purse, or maybe in the garbage can. So he starts digging through the trash where that purse was found, and that's where he discovers that blood-stained towel inside of a garbage bag. And he unrolls that towel, which, keep in mind, it's embroidered with this freaking kid's name. And I know what you're thinking. This kid is not exactly a genius, obviously, but he unrolls it, and he discovers a smashed cell phone inside of that towel, which was later determined to be Katherine's cell phone. So now we got signs of foul play, because you got bloody towels inside of this garbage can. And remember, they haven't been in his house yet. So immediately this officer, he calls for backup to help search this area, thinking maybe her body's out here, or maybe she's hurt out here. We got to find her. Any clues to this girl's disappearance that were in the area, they're going to have to search for. And while that is going on, Detective Kwasnicka, she gets a phone call from Michael's mother, Barbara. Michael's mother, Barbara, found that business card left on the front door of the residence. And she tells the detective Michael was at work at the airport currently. So that detective asks for Michael's cell phone number. The mother gives it to her, and look, this was really smart. It wasn't because this detective wanted to call Michael. She was seeing if the number matched up to quote unquote Amy's number. And guess what? It matched. Amy had given Katherine the same number that is Michael's cell phone number. So at 8:40 p.m. that evening, a detective, Hennon, he speaks with airport police, and he basically tells the sergeant what's going on and that they think Michael may have some knowledge to where Katherine is, and that they need to speak to him and hold him at that airport until they get there. And the sergeant complies. He does exactly that. So the detectives, they arrive at the airport and they take Michael into an interview room at that airport, and they explain to him, hey, you're being detained because we have a missing persons and we think you were the last person to see this person alive, and we need to talk to you in regards to the investigation into her disappearance. Now, for whatever reason, at that point, rather than interview Michael at the airport, they go ahead and they transport him to the Savage Police Department. And this is at 9:20 p.m. that same evening. So they're moving fast. And remember, this is just the next day from this incident occurring. Now, in the meantime, police are still looking for signs of Katherine's vehicle. They haven't found it yet, but they have helicopters in the air and especially circling this nature preserve. And as this helicopter is circling, he finds a car parked in that nature preserve and he radios it in. And Officer Swell, who's still working, this guy's been working all day and night, he goes out there for a third time and he locates that car. He confirms the tag number, the make, the model, and realizes this is definitely, without a doubt, Katherine's car. So he takes his flashlight, because it's nighttime, right? It's late. It's after 9:30 at night, and he starts looking inside the vehicle. He doesn't see anything that would indicate any sort of struggle. He doesn't see any blood anywhere. It just looked like a regular car parked in the nature preserve and abandoned. So at this point, two agents for the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, their names are Agent Swanson and Agent Evans, they arrive and they ask a pretty simple question, which is, has anybody looked in the trunk? Obviously, no one had, so they pop that trunk, and sadly, that is where they discover the body of Katherine Olson. And all of this is done by 10:20 p.m. And that is fantastic police work. Now, it's at that time that they head to Michael's home because they're pretty sure his home is now an actual crime scene, and they want to secure that while they seek a search warrant. So when they get there, Michael's father, he greets them at the front door, and he actually lets them in the house and directs them to Michael's personal computer. Michael's mother actually had the login information for that because it was more like a family computer, even though Michael used it the most. But these parents, shout out to them, they were cooperating with police. Maybe they felt like Michael had nothing to do with it, and they're trying to help the police, or maybe they figured he did have something to do with it and they're doing the right thing. But regardless, at this point, they are cooperating. So while searching the home, as I told you, Michael did not do a great job of cleaning. Police, they would discover blood spatter in multiple areas. And so they would kill the lights and they would actually use a chemical called luminol, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's a spray you can use at a crime scene that will eliminate blood even if it's been wiped up and you can't see it with the naked eye. So everywhere that this kid cleaned up, when they killed those lights and they sprayed that luminol, it glowed like the freaking 4th of July in there. And, you know, I was curious that, well, how did his parents not see this when they got home? But remember, this is a 2-story home. They may not have went upstairs. And he did clean up the blood on the stairway. They did find some blood spatter or some blood that had touched the top of the railings, but his parents may not have noticed any of that. They may have stayed kind of downstairs most of the time. Maybe his bedroom for sure was upstairs. Maybe theirs was downstairs and they were in the den or something, and they go to bed and they never even go upstairs. I don't know. He wasn't home. He was at work, so there would be really no reason to go up there. But it bothered me, and I'm trying to make sense of that. Now, you got all this evidence, and police, at this point, they got this piece of shit dead to rights. And they have him back at the station, remember? So they go ahead, they read him his Miranda rights, and this was around 11:20 p.m. And Michael, he agrees to talk to the police, and he lies his fucking ass off. He tells police he hasn't been on Craigslist since January of that year, 2007. And he said he primarily used his father's personal computer and not the one everybody in the family used. So he actually, in my opinion, was trying to throw this off on his own father at this point. But again, he's no rocket scientist. And one thing police asked him was, hey, what's your email address? Well, this moron gives them his real email address, which matched the email address that he was emailing Katherine saying he was Amy. So he's giving them this evidence at this point. And police make Michael aware, hey, we have your phone number. We have the fact that she called your phone number to arrange this nanny job. And if you're saying you had anything to do with this, does anyone else have access to your phone? And he says no. But even though he said that, he continues to deny having any contact with Katherine. And then under pressure, he makes up another total lie, totally out of left field. And he says, okay, I was present when Katherine was killed, but I didn't kill her. A friend of mine killed her named Antoine. And he can tell by this point that police, they know he's full of shit. There's no Antoine. So he stops the interview and he says, hey, I want to lawyer up. And of course, that ends everything. And this is at 12:40 a.m. Now, in the meantime, the coroners did what they do, and they determined she was shot while she was standing, meaning Katherine. She fell forward, which created injuries to her face and her knees. And also, they sadly determined she had lived approximately 20 minutes after she had been shot and stuffed into that trunk. Just horrible. And it didn't take long for this case to get out and draw national attention. It was almost immediate. Media outlets would label Anderson quickly the Craigslist Killer. And the trial, it would open. This was in March of 2009 in Scott County, and a district judge by the name of Mary Thiessen presided over that case. And the trial lasted a week. Prosecutors presented a case of premeditated first-degree murder, that he carefully constructed a false identity of Amy, that choice right there, and I agree with them, proved he knew what he was doing. That also the fact that he cleaned up the scene, that proved, or attempted to clean up the scene, that proved that he knew what he was doing was wrong. Because look, most people are going to plead this insanity defense, or most lawyers are going to have their people plead this. And the problem with that is when you clean up a scene, it proves you knew what you did were wrong. Truly insane people have no idea what they did was wrong. So anytime you try to cover your tracks or you premeditate something, that basically blows a hole in an entire insanity defense. So the defense had a problem, but they came up with a different approach. They argued the shooting was not premeditated, but it was accidental. And they said it was the tragic result of a socially awkward young man who had Asperger's. But the judge ruled the Asperger's evidence inadmissible. Now, she's not debating maybe this kid had Asperger's. The problem was he tried to clean up, and that proved he knew it was wrong. Asperger's or not, if you know something's wrong, and he definitely knew killing someone was wrong, you don't do it. Now, throughout the proceedings, Anderson largely remained expressionless, and prosecutors would point to this lack of visible emotion as further evidence of just how cold-hearted this kid was. He just didn't give a shit. Katherine's family sat through the testimony. They heard clinical details of the crime scene and the autopsy. And of course, that's a very emotional weight to carry. But on April 1st of 2009, after deliberating for less than 6 hours, the jury returns its verdict. And it was 6 total counts, including first-degree premeditated murder, and he was found guilty on all 6 counts. Now, I can imagine for Katherine's family, it was a moment of profound relief mixed with just this ongoing pain of loss. And for Anderson, then 20 years old, it would seal his fate. And sentencing would follow on April 2nd, where he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And one thing you get during these sentencings is victim impact statements, which to me are one of the most important things in the justice system. The ability of these victims to address killers and rapists and people like that. And Nancy Olson, Katherine's mom, she spoke with some pretty raw honesty. She would describe how her daughter's dreams had been stolen from the moment that Katherine knocked on this kid's door. And she would talk about wonderful memories of Katherine singing, attending Bible camp, loving life, etc. And she said, I am incapable of forgetting, and I can't forgive Michael. He's not asked to be forgiven, nor has he admitted any wrongdoing. This kid denied it even through the victim impact statements. And the judge, he imposes the mandatory sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Anderson gets led away to serve that sentence. And of course, as you know, appeals are going to follow. Anderson's attorneys, they would continue to argue about the exclusion of Asperger's evidence, and they would say that denied him a fair trial. But the Minnesota Supreme Court said bullshit. They upheld the conviction and the sentence. So Michael John Anderson, he begins serving a sentence of life in prison. And today, more than 17 years later, he remains behind the walls of Minnesota's highest security prison. And according to the Department of Corrections in Minnesota, his offender ID number is 228994. His current status is listed as incarcerated, and his current facility is the Minnesota Correctional Facility, Oak Park Heights, often referred to as OPH. He has been there continuously since his admission to that facility on April 2nd of 2009. Now, Oak Park Heights is Minnesota's only level 5 maximum security prison. It opened in 1982, and it is designed to house the state's most serious evil offenders, those requiring the highest level of security and control. It can hold approximately 473 incarcerated individuals, and most of the people housed there are classified maximum or close custody levels. And to tell you how strong Oak Park Heights is on security, the prison has never had a successful escape. So guess what, Michael Anderson? You ain't getting out of there. Now, Anderson was a young adult when he entered the system. He's now in his late 30s. There's no publicized reports that I could find of any major discipline problems involving Anderson. And as far as I know, he remains listed at Oak Park Heights, continuing to serve the sentence handed down to him in 2009. Now, for the Olson family, Anderson's incarceration, it represents the legal system's final answer to the loss of their daughter. Now, in the years following the trial, they have spoken about focusing on Katherine's memory rather than on the man who took her life. They established a scholarship at St. Olaf College in her name, and that supports students pursuing theater and Hispanic studies, which the very same subjects Katherine loved. In this case, as I told you, was one of the earliest to spotlight the potential dangers of online classified ads. It prompted important conversations about safety, verification, trusting your instincts when something feels off. Now, while technology and safety practices, they've evolved since 2007, gotten much better, the core lesson remains: real people exist on the other side of every screen, y'all. And vigilance, staying on top of your shit, matters. And in my opinion, many things as it relates to the internet have gotten more dangerous, especially now in this day and time with phone apps and gaming apps like Roblox, etc. These seemingly innocent gaming platforms have become an absolute cesspool for many sick human beings, but none more sick than child predators. So if you have children, pay attention to what they're doing on the internet and their phones. Get in their business, because there are millions and millions of predators out there on those apps right now, catfishing kids, guaranteed. And with that, of course, my thoughts and prayers go out to Katherine's family and all who knew and loved her. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for supporting me, everything I do with Bloody Angola podcast. I really hope you're enjoying the 50 Shades of Evil series, where, of course, I cover an evil human being from each of the 50 states. I'm about halfway through, y'all, and I hope you're enjoying it. Share this podcast with others if you think they will enjoy it. It is absolutely the only way I'm going to continue to grow and that I can continue bringing you these stories. Check us out on Patreon if you'd like to support. Patreon.com/Bloody Angola podcast, commercial-free early releases and more. I could not do this show without them. Simply could not do it. Too expensive and requires too much time. So please consider supporting through Patreon. And until next time, for Bloody Angola, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.